Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. There's still a lot of you out there, which tells me only one thing, that the bar isn't open yet. I love this 5 o'clock slot. It's awesome. I know General Minahan and General Alvin both argued with my staff to try to trade out of their spots to get back here. And this is mentoring lesson 1 on why it's so important to have a really good staff, right? They were able to preserve this spot. So there you go for those of you taking notes at home. Just one last observation, and then I'll get started. I can tell I'm at LOA because the group before, right, all the A4s were sitting up here in cushy chairs, right, and then immediately, right, make the acquisition guys stand up, get those chairs out of there. We'll get revenge for all those systems they provide us that are so hard to sustain. We'll teach them. Okay, all right. Well, my revenge is I've got slides. So you'll have to bear with me, but I've only got 20-ish minutes, so I'll be moving through them pretty quick. All right, so first, I think it is a little bit of framing up front in case all of you maybe aren't familiar with Air Force Materiel Command and Air Force Lifecycle Management Center. So inside of Air Force Materiel Command, right, we do the life cycle activities for everything in the Air Force. And we do that in 6 centers. Starting with the Air Force Research Lab, which again, somewhat intuitive, right? They do research. Working our way into our 2 predominant acquisition centers, the Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center, again, aptly named. They support our nuclear systems, predominantly our systems that are purely nuclear. So think Minuteman III, think Sentinel, think ALCM, think LRSO, things like that, okay? Then you have the Lifecycle Management Center. I'm not sure how exactly we came up with that name, but the easiest way to remember is we do everything that the Nuclear Weapons Center doesn't do, which is just about everything for the Air Force, okay? Right, because that's a pretty specific mission set that they do, right, and we do all the rest. And then we partner with our test center partners and our sustainment center partners. I think I see General Hawkins out in the audience, right, the sustainment center commander. Probably not speaking, this is LOA, you're probably not speaking at a 5 o'clock slot, is my guess. I'm at 8. And then we have IMSC, our Installation and Mission Support, which is a little bit different. It's our newest center, but does the base infrastructure. But you can see kind of cradle to grave, and that's where LCMC fits. LCMC is a huge enterprise, right? We execute more than $304 billion. Okay, so top 5 Fortune 500, depending on how the market was today. I didn't check, but that's a lot. The other thing that most people don't realize is 75% of the dollars we execute on behalf of our foreign partners, right? So a huge amount of our business is supporting allies and partners beyond the activities that we do just for ourselves. Okay, this is where we are in the world. In fact, over this morning, I was over visiting our team at Scott. We do have a team here on site at Scott Air Force Base, supporting the AOC, supporting a lot of the MAF systems that are operated out of here. But our predominant headquarters, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I own 2 installations from an installation management perspective, Wright-Pat and Hanscom. But we have huge teams all over. Our second largest acquisition location is actually Robins Air Force Base. So if you factor out the Air Base Group at Hanscom, from an acquisition workforce program execution perspective, our actual second largest location is at one of our complexes, co-located with our teams that are doing sustainment activity. And so this is what I said before, right? What do we do in LCMC, right? Pretty much everything. Pretty much everything in terms of delivering equipment to airmen to go execute their missions. And that is cradle to grave, in terms of the life cycle management of those things and the programs that manage them, and our partnerships with the test centers to get them tested, our partnerships with the sustainment centers to sustain them, our partnership with the supply chain to ensure that they continue to get adequate supplies. All aspects of the life cycle for all of that equipment, right, that the Air Force needs to fly, fight, and win comes out of Air Force Life Cycle Management Center. Okay, so I originally had an hour, and then I sent in my slides, and the team saw this slide, and they cut me back to half an hour because they were really afraid I was going to talk about this, and I'm not going to, okay? The only reason I throw this slide up, right, is to highlight what we do from an acquisition perspective. What it takes to actually deliver a weapon system is really, really complex, okay? There are a lot of things that go into that. But in reality, it's also relatively simple, okay? And we execute the simple part of that every single day when we have to support contingency operations, when we support JUONs, when we support GEONs, when we support surge, okay? And those things really boil down to three very, very simple things, right? Clear requirements that are resourced and prioritized, right? When you boil it all down, when you can give the acquisition community those three things, a very clear requirement that is resourced, and we understand its priority relative to all of the other things that we need to go do, the teams are able to do fantastic, amazing things, accepting appropriate risk where they need to deliver capability rapidly to the warfighter, okay? And this is the model, frankly, that we would fall back on if we end up, right, in another fight anywhere in the world. This is the model that we fall back on to execute. Okay, and these are the phases. There's nothing that's surprising here to you. What I do want to do is just maybe walk through briefly a few examples of how this actually materializes and how the team is able to deliver. So this example actually happened when I was the weapons director down at Eglin Air Force Base. We were running out of munitions. We were going through the surge. We had significant deficiencies in JDAMs and Hellfires. Pretty much every precision-guided weapon that we were using, right, we were running out. We were moving them around the globe, trying to get them into CENTCOM. And there was a requirement that came in that said, hey, it would be really helpful if you could give us a really low-cost, precise weapon that we could use to hit specific targets so we didn't have to continue to use JDAMs and Hellfires on targets that really, honestly, didn't need a JDAM or a Hellfire. And so out of that was born Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System. This was a huge tri-service partnership. We took an existing rocket, essentially cut it in half, put a laser guidance kit in the middle, mounted it onto fixed-wing aircraft, taking launchers from the Navy that used them on their Harriers, and from the point that we received funding to the point that we put weapons in the field was 4 months. And from the point that we put weapons in the field to the first confirmed use was 11 days, okay? And then we immediately surged that capability to be able to build these from 1s and 2s, right, to 25,000, going even higher, though I think the higher plan might have kind of fallen off a little bit now from where it was at one point in time. Okay, the hardest part of this was actually the front end, which was the fuse. Okay, because there were two fuses they wanted integrated. One was a frag fuse and one was a penetrator. The frag fuse was used by the Army. It was predominantly used for armored systems. So what we found was when you, instead of an APC or a tank, when you hit a pickup truck, the weapon would go all the way through and blow up on the far side, and so it actually wasn't effective. So it took us a number of iterations to actually work fuse timing to be able to actually make it effective against lightly armored targets. And the same with the Navy. The Navy's penetrator warhead on the front end was actually designed for ships, so designed for very, very thick hulls. And so the fuse timing for that wasn't ideal either. So that actually was, of all that time, took the longest time. Huge enterprise solution. The test center moved this to the front of all the activities they were doing because we were given this as a priority, right? And so again, resources, prioritization, and very clear requirements. And in this case, they actually phased the requirements because it was going to take us longer to give them a 2-warhead solution, right? So we got priority on the frag warhead first. We were able to deliver that and then follow up later with the penetrator. So when those three things come together, right, the teams can deliver capability incredibly rapidly to the field. COVID-19. COVID-19, another huge example, and this is a great set of lessons that I think will be really important as we begin to think about a potential conflict with China, when we begin to think about ACE, when we begin to think about what that's going to mean from a national response perspective in perhaps lots of areas that we're not even thinking about today. Medical supplies, right? A conflict with China is going to generate an enormous number of casualties, far more than we're used to dealing with, right? There's a medical supply aspect of that we need to be thinking about. COVID is a great example of how we were able to leverage Air Force, predominantly at the beginning, Air Force Lifecycle Management contracting officers, program managers, to come out of their normal day-to-day jobs, to supplement Health and Human Services and Department of Homeland Security, right, to energize an entire industrial base that did not exist, or certainly did not exist on this scale, to supply not only for the Air Force, but really to national needs across a whole wide range of things. And again, another example of when needed, right, we can pull people who have that expertise to surge against things that we never anticipated, certainly, in February of 2020, that's what we would be doing in April of 2020, right? But we were able to respond to that very, very rapidly. Inside of that, another great example, so the chief actually talked about this two fall AFAs ago. He recognized Captain Alexis Todero, who ran the team that was tasked with generating a mobile solution to bring COVID-19 patients, so remember this was very, very early in the pandemic when we were still learning, back from Europe. And so they were able to take, within 100 days, essentially create inside of a Connex box a negatively pressurized hospital suite that allowed nurses and doctors to enter. Because it was negatively pressurized, it contained everything inside. It was essentially tied down inside of a C-17. And any of you who have worked to have to put something new on an aircraft through the airworthiness process know how incredibly difficult that process can be, right? And so to be able to not only create this capability that is able to safely transport these patients and medical personnel, but to be able to do that in an aircraft where you can put that in within that amount of time was a phenomenal effort. And again, it was a phenomenal effort because it had those three things were very clearly aligned. A very clear set of requirements. This was prioritized above all other things, right? So our partners in AMC, this was actually done out of Aberdeen, right? So the people that were doing this, their background was chem bio, right? So we took our chem bio experts, because this is the kind of thing that they do. The medical community all came together to be able to deliver this capability on that kind of time. And they started with that version. They created then a follow-on version to that, which is light, and we have continued to deploy these out to folks who are now finding other utilizations for them beyond what was initially the utilization, which was COVID. Ukraine, another great example, right? So our enterprise has surged in a number of different ways to support Ukraine. Again, another item that we certainly did not anticipate. We were not preparing ourselves, right, for two major powers in a ground war in Europe. Was not on the top of anybody's expectation list not that long ago. But we surged in another number of areas. So a shout out to the Rapid Sustainment Office. I think there's a presentation tomorrow on what they're doing with additive manufacturing. But this is a great example where we got a request in to support additively manufacturing parts for UAVs to be able to surge support into Ukraine at the beginning of the conflict while the industrial base was able to actually catch up and be able to support that. And they used essentially a repair network, like an RNI kind of concept, to reach out to all of the different additive manufacturing centers that we have within the Air Force, right, to distribute that work out to be able to get it done at the scale that we needed to be able to get it done. And I don't know if they'll talk about that tomorrow, but an incredible capability that we are building out more and more. This is really a proof of concept, I think, of where we're going with additive manufacturing in the Air Force. This ability that I can have a network of manufacturing centers that I can task them to be able to do things as we need to while they're also doing individual things. Our Air Force Security Cooperation Center, it's again part of LCMC. They run all of our foreign military sales activities. They were able to work with a number of our different programs, right, to surge different weapons. The Army has done a lot more of this than we have. but we've certainly seen a lot of this inside the Air Force, whether that be AMRAAMs. We talked about generally about UASs and other support services that we've been providing, and this continues. And you will certainly see more of this if we end up moving into something like an F-16 sale. However we were to get there, then the F-16 program office will certainly be very, very involved then ensuring that we're not just selling F-16s to Ukraine or providing F-16s to Ukraine in some way, that we're actually providing them an F-16 capability, which involves all the things that all of you do every single day, right, to keep aircraft flying and make them combat capable. And then we also do training. So along with a lot of the artillery support that the Army has been providing, we were able to surge forge training associated with targeting to help them support real-time targeting and minimizing collateral damage. And again, far in advance of what we would normally do, but again, given a very clear priority, given resources, and given the requirement, right, the team was able to lean into that and provide that far in advance of what we would normally be able to do. Okay, and where does that go, right? That leads us then into what's been a pretty common topic lately, which is operational imperatives. And so we are thinking about inside of Air Force Lifecycle Management Center as we prepare for the operational imperatives, we are thinking about the operational imperatives exactly through that lens, right? The Secretary of the Air Force has very clearly articulated this is his #1 priority. We know it's going to grow out. We know that we have 3 new COEs to include mobility, weapons, right, and electronic magnetic spectrum operations. There might be more on top of the OIs. So this will grow, but we've been very clearly told inside of Air Force Lifecycle Management Center this is the priority, right? We've worked with the Congress, with OSD, to work the resourcing, and we have very clearly defined requirements. And so we will treat, right, the operational imperatives like we would treat any of the things that we just talked about before. Right, we will prioritize these activities. We will shift resources, experienced workforce into these efforts to ensure that we can deliver these things on time, because the Secretary has clearly said these are the things that we have to be successful in deterring Chinese aggression. And so we will operate these exactly that way. And there are some things that we've got to work to do there, right, that we are really focused on, which is having facilities available to us, right, to work these programs in secure spaces, being able to hire the right talent that we need. The reality is for work like this, when you get work like this in, that workforce is the workforce you have, right? You are not going to be able to go hire an external workforce to come in to work these kind of things. It's going to come from the people you have. What you do have to do, though, is surge the hiring behind that to backfill behind the holes you make as you surge people into these critical activities, so that we're able to continue to support all the other weapon systems, right, that are out there that still require that. So we are working on all of those things. Okay, so again, when we think about the Air Force Lifecycle Management Center, when we think about all the work we do to sustain weapon systems, a lot of that thought often gets wrapped up in really big weapon systems. It gets wrapped up in this idea that it takes forever to field anything. And all of those things are true, right? We do work really highly complex weapon systems, and sometimes those really highly complex weapon systems take a long time to field, okay? But it shouldn't be lost that we also do this, right? We also do this, which is we surge support where we have to surge it to support contingency operations wherever those are. And we're going to do that with the operational imperatives. And if, God forbid, we do end up in a high-end conflict, we will do that there as well to be able to support all of you to get you whatever it is you need to be successful. Okay, and with that, I will certainly take a few questions if you have any.
Great. While we wait for the QR code to come up, I was actually handed a question. So what initiatives are addressing the Valley of Death?
Okay, well, I'm going to start with I really hate that term, Valley of Death. Okay, so I'll start there. I think it's incredibly misleading, first. So we have technology, okay, and we need to be able to transition that technology into our weapon systems. And there's a process by which we do that. And we use capability development planning to do that. I'm going to use an RSO example here. We have in the RSO, our framework is innovate, apply, and scale. Okay, so we do a lot of innovation on the front end, and that's very, very broad-based. Okay, the part that we often forget, and the part that sometimes gets lost in this, what I think is a very kind of easy, right, valley of death excuse, is this concept that we actually have to take that technology and be able to apply it against relevant Air Force problem sets to determine whether or not it actually provides value to us. And that's what actually happens in that middle session, right? We have too much and too often what people want to do, in my view, is the Evel Knievel version of crossing that valley, right? Strap a rocket on their back, launch themselves over, declare themselves a program of record, right, and I'm good. Without ever determining whether or not that technology actually provides a relevant value to the warfighter or not. So, you know, what I think of is really, right, it's a valley of opportunity to do the work to figure out whether or not that technology really serves a purpose or not. And what you will find is if you, and this is, in the innovation space, I think we are often reluctant to ever say no. It's like if I tell somebody no, that's not a good idea, right? I'm anti-innovation. But the reality is, if you go talk to people in the innovation space, the word they hear the most often is no, right? Because they have an innovation that doesn't have an application. And what they do then, right, is they learn from each of those no's to evolve their technology to get to a point that actually provides relevance. And that's the part of this we can't be afraid to do. And I do think it minimizes it a little bit when we just say it's the valley of death, right? It's a problem. And what we need to be able to do is get back to what is the actual challenge that we're trying to address? Is that technology actually relevant to solving a problem that we have? And if it is, then we ought to move rapidly through that process to field it. But we should take the time to actually ask ourselves that question first.
Great, thank you, sir. There's a question, can you talk to the gaps and seams that were created with the 5-center construct, and if you agree with that statement, how we are closing that gap?
Yeah, well, I would have agreed with that statement because I think there were gaps and seams when we first stood up, and there are gaps and seams anytime you do a major reorganization, right? And so we went from 12 centers down to 5. There were things that were created in terms of how we were used to interfacing with each other that were generated by that. 10 years in, maybe 11 years in now, we have worked our way through those. I do not view there as being any gaps and seams between myself and General Hawkins at this point in time. He and I engage in a number of forums together that we work through issues. I do not view there as being any gaps and seams between myself and General Pringle, who runs the Air Force Research Lab, right? So we have worked diligently. All of the prior leaders prior to us have worked those things. Now, there are still hard things in this business, but I don't think we should chalk the fact that some of this is hard to the fact that we haven't over the past 11 years worked to try to get it from an organizational perspective to be efficient and effective.
Thank you. Another question, how are we ensuring acquisition of proprietary data, specifically software data, to make resilient organic supply chain?
Yeah, so very good question. So the first answer to that is hopefully we stop buying proprietary software, right? And so we have opportunities to do this. One of the biggest is competition, because in competition we can set the framework for what that procurement looks like, and we can tell folks up front, and when they're competing, is the time to get them not to propose to us proprietary solutions. Where we have already proprietary solutions in the system, and we do have some of those, there are a number of efforts going on to work our way through engaging with industry and thinking about how do we ensure that we can get exactly what we need to be able to do what we have to be able to do. And in some cases, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to own that software or that data. It might mean that we can come up with some type of licensing arrangement that allows me to still be able to do what I need organically if I need to do something, while not necessarily having to go through having to fully buy all of those data rights, because we found that to be cost prohibitive. If you don't deal with this up front, it does not become cheaper later on. Okay, so the first step is you got to deal with it up front. Build contracts today that don't put ourselves in that situation. We should have learned that lesson. We've learned it over and over again, but by now we should have learned it. But for systems where we are in that, we're going to have to think creatively, and we have teams of folks to include our legal teams and our IP managers who are working through how do I ensure that I can define exactly what it is I need to be able to do with that data, and then how do I craft a relationship that allows me to accomplish that? And that may not in every case mean that I have to own the data.
Great, thank you. And I think our final question, can you express to us what mission command looks like in an acquisition and sustainment environment?
Wow, you saved that one for the end. Okay, well, I don't think it looks any different, honestly, than how we have always done business. And everybody's a little bit different, right? But from an acquisition perspective, right, we ask our program managers, so our leadership, right, inside of the programs, in our version of that is a material leader, a senior material leader. That's the equivalent of a squadron commander, group commander, wing commander. We provide them very clear expectations with regards to, right, I'm going to come back to my three very basic things, right? What are the requirements that they're supposed to deliver? Right? What is the funding that they have available to them? And what is where is their priority? And then we let them go craft exactly the best way using whatever that suite of tools is to deliver that. So we are not, I am never directive to a program manager that says you need to go do business this way, you need to do it this way, right? What we provide them is exactly mission command type orders. This is the capability I need to have from an Air Force perspective. It's your job to figure out how to get me from where I am today to having that fully fielded capability in partnership, right, with our warfighters. And so I think mission command looks the same in the acquisition community as it does really anywhere else. It just manifests itself slightly different because our mission is slightly different. And we do that for new weapon systems, but that's equally true for weapon systems that have been around a long time where the predominant focus is on sustaining those weapon systems.
Great.
Okay, and I think you said that was the last question.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time.